He's a fighter pilot like I was. Born in South Dakota in 1925. I find this fascinating. Met my future wife the first day of Sunday school. He was an Eagle Scout, jock and a valedictorian. Joined the Minnesota Guard a couple of months after Pearl Harbor at the age of 16. Joined Navy V-5 program in early 43 went to wings out of Pensacola, went into fighters and missed combat in World War II. After a couple of Westpac carrier tours, the Navy sent him to University of Minnesota, got a bachelor's degree in a year and a half, and was sent to Monterey PG school. Then on to Korea, flying F-9, F-5s off the Oriskany. And I think that is when his event occurred. I think I first met Royce in about 60 or so. 1960, I was an instructor in the F-124, the F-8 rag, and I believe. Anyway, let's get on with it and get Royce up here to talk about his just incredible experience one day in Korea flying an F-9, F-5. Royce?
This is my To Russia with Love mission, kind of like David and 7 Goliaths. I'm not really used to this. I was forget about it, and the story didn't come out until 50-some years after the event. I was taken aside by a vice admiral and told that the very first event for NASA had occurred, and they were on the Helena right off the coast of Vladivostok, so they had everything to know about the event, and we didn't want to let the world know that we had this kind of capability, so not to tell anybody, that included my wife and brother, the Marine aviator. I didn't tell anybody till almost recently. To lay the groundwork here, we were doing our normal air-to-ground, trucks, bridges, and close air support around the 38th parallel. So there were targets way north that were neglected, and that's where the heavy industry was. So they decided to send a task force of probably 25 ships at the cover of night, and I was on the first flight in the morning to hit a city called Orion, right on the Yalu River. It was a heavy industry. We had 3 air wings participating, 3 different carriers up there. And this riled up the Soviets, where they did a lot of chatter and had a lot of airplanes launched, to the concern of our task force and Jocko Clark, who was on the Missouri, his flagship. So I turned around and had another flight. It was put together with 3 other guys that hadn't had the same number of flights as the other people in our squadron. I had been on a flight flying with a cold and diving and broke both eardrums, and blood was coming around my chin. And so I had a few days off and now to catch up. So I had never flown with these guys before. So the senior guy was the lead, and I was section, and I had a wingman, Dave Rollins. The weather was terrible. It was probably 400 feet, heavy snow and heavy winds. So we had lunch and manned planes and launched and climbed through to 12,000 feet. And on the way, CIC said they had bandits incoming about 70 miles. And as we popped on top in the clear, I saw the contrails approaching, and as they got closer, I identified them as MiGs. The flight leader had a warning light, and he was directed with his wingman to remain over the task force. So I proceeded with Roland's. I test fired the guns, and checked the radar and sight. Everything was perfect. So as they came over the top of us, they turned north, and I thought, going home, they said, "That is your target." So I proceeded to climb toward them as they way out distanced me, and they were probably 30 miles north of me when they split into two groups, 3 and 4, and coming back in opposite directions, and obviously to bracket Rollins and me. I lost sight of them when they dropped out of the contrails. They were probably 50,000 feet or higher. And I was now at 26,000 feet and leveled there. I was given a direction to come back and establish a barricade between last sighting and the task force. In that turn, there came 4 of them at 10 o'clock position, all firing. And I wrestled the plane around and got on the number 4 guy in a short burst, and he dropped out of the formation. But so did my wingman. And so he was not a part of it, just as well, because his guns never fired. I don't know why, but they didn't. And later on, he popped back up as I was shot up and trying to make my way into the clouds with a MiG right on my tail. And he thought he was taking pictures, but his camera didn't work either. So I came back unescorted. So I was told, I reported that I had just fired at one that was dropped out of the formation, and I was told, "Do not engage." I said, "We are engaged." They said, "Go get them." So I had 6 remaining. The 3 now, the 1 gone. One of them I picked on, was going to pick on the section leader who had lost his wingman, and he pulled up abruptly and outdistanced me and was in the sun, and I started to climb and sort of select him as the guy I'm going to engage if I could. When I noticed the other 2 had already peaked out 2,000 or 3,000 feet above me and had turned back and were coming head on. So I changed over to point my guns at these guys. The lead fired at me probably 5,000 feet or so out of range. So I kept pointing until I thought maybe, and I fired just a burst and he broke off. But his wingman came on down, and I'm sure he's one of the dead. He was just straight away and went, I passed over him probably a couple hundred feet or so, but I just had him dead on all the way. And this was about an hour and 35-minute flight. I'd say about 35 minutes of it was hassling. The other 3 guys came in during this time, and instead of fighting as a unit, they sort of did like we do on the gunnery flight of 1 on, 2 off, and taking their turns. They dazzled me with the performance of the airplane. I didn't try and do anything fancy. I was just turning and shooting. And one of them overshot me and forgot to pull up and use his plane to the max, and I nailed him and parts came off, and now I almost swallowed him. So I had to dodge to get out of the way. And on it went, and I had another one that was smoking, and I was sort of chasing him when I saw a guy coming in at my 6, and I kicked the airplane around. I had a good angle off on him, and he was one lucky shot. Hit me with a 37 millimeter right in the accessory section of the engine, which knocked out a whole lot of my stuff. And the airplane was out of rig and hard to fly, and I was out of ammunition. And I pointed toward the clouds and back toward the task force. He settled in about 300 feet behind me, and was trying to use everything he had. And I was just the elevator was working fine. It's the only thing that was really working. So I pushed it over and I pulled it back, and I'd see these things above and then below and above and below, and I just kept this up until I got in the clouds. And I guess he lost sight of the clouds were really dense and snow. So I'm proceeding back on my own, and I didn't know the condition of the airplane. In order to eject in a Panther, which it was, you have to be 1,200 feet, 120 knots, level or climbing. It was still flying, and I was sticking with it. And I eased on down, and I knew the base of the clouds were 400 feet, so I just went until I was under it. And getting closer to the task force and talking to them, and they were readying the deck to bring me aboard. And I was playing with this to see what I had to do. I used all the trim I could, and it still took 2 hands on the stick. And as I came into the task force, the defenses opened up on me because of a breakdown between the gunnery liaison officer and CIC, and they were general quarters guns free. But it didn't last long. There was an ensign been selected for flight training and recognized the Panther and called off the dogs. So it took a little while because they were about to launch one more flight against northern targets and then get the heck out of there. So they had to pull everything forward. And it took, that time I dropped my gear without hydraulics, and the tail hook came down, so I was otherwise clean, and at 170 knots, the airplane became uncontrollable, so I told them I was coming in hot. And I made a big wide circle as best I could with what I had to play with, and got about 4 miles away with the carrier now coming into the wind, and I'm making a straightaway. But I couldn't fly over and line up, so I'm coming in at an angle. I talked to the LSO and I'm telling them that I'm probably 180 knots, and he calls the skipper, Courtney Shands, the captain of the ship, and he says, bring him in any speed you want. We got 40 knots natural wind, and we can build on that. Then I said, next, I can't line up. So I had probably 20-degree angle off on the deck, and I could see going right over the side. He said, we'll cut you for an early wire. Well, it didn't sound great, but at least he was thinking. So as I got on into that position, the captain of the ship kicked the ship around and lined it right. I caught number 3 wire, and there I was. That's it. 263 holes in the airplane, and they robbed some parts off it and pushed it over the side. Do I have time for a little more?
Oh, let me go. I got time now.
Can you tell us what was so classified that you couldn't talk about it for 50 years? What was it?
I'm surmising.
Oh.
I don't know. They were Russians. They weren't supposed to be involved, but Admiral Briscoe told me it was because it was NSA's very first operation, and we did not want to disclose that we had that capability.
What capability?
Well, of knowing chapter and verse. If I was never able to tell, and the guy that wrote this thing up didn't know the story. He made it up. And he passed around kudos, wrote up awards accordingly, gave Middleton, who really didn't engage, but he came back, I suppose the last plane I had smoking, it was letting on down, and he fired from maybe 400 yards out on the beam, and then it's coming on around behind, and the guy ejected, and they gave him credit for a kill, and gave him a Silver Star. So it goes.
What was the date?
I think it was the 18th of November in 1952.
Were they, which MiGs were they, 15s or 17s?
15s. Which was good enough.
So how did they write up this incident? Did they call them North Korean airplanes? Is that what the record said?
They just said MiG, so they didn't say anything about where they might have come from. Well, once it was written up, I came into the ready room, and I had to go through a lot of watertight doors and stuff to get there. And everybody was just beaming and smiling in there, and I was met by the air intelligence officer, and he'd had everybody pledge that they weren't going to ask any questions until he got through debriefing. So they sat there grinning, and I started getting out of my poopy suit. I was bleeding around the neck from a whole lot of looking around, and no one's talking to me, including the air intelligence officer. Well, he's going to wait until the whole flight got there, and he wanted to talk to the flight leader first, who I suppose saw the MiGs at one time, but wasn't involved. And so the pressure coming from him, because Washington wanted to know, they were aware of this thing, and they yelled at him, and he was taking all kinds of crap. And he had seen what was coming over the teletype and some reports about engagement. So in his mind, he is putting together a story. And finally, he just all got down, and we started asking questions of Elwood, who led the thing, and Middleton, who saw these one airplane. And then he talked to me a little bit, and frankly, I didn't know in detail how things were worked out. And so suddenly he just broke and ran and went in and wrote his story and came back and said, "This is what I said." The skipper says, "That's it." Nobody asked any questions. I don't think anybody even talked to me about the flight until I went to see, I was ordered to see Admiral Briscoe, and he gave me this and said, "Shut up." And I did. And I did go and see the fun part of this thing. I got to meet President Eisenhower and a bunch of 5 stars, and the rest are scattering of 4 stars. And it was a fun event. But other than that, mum's the word until about 10, 15 years ago. Yes, sir.
How many kills did you get credit for?
Well, now 4.
4?
Yeah.
Is that?
3 got away. But I was out of ammo. Anyway.
Did anybody else in the Navy get credit for more than that at that time?
Well, I'm sometimes substitute with American fighter aces. And about 5 months ago, I was in Seattle, and Lieutenant General Chico lives in Alabama. Shot down 4, and his wingman says, "I think you got another one," and it was never confirmed. 20 years later, somebody looking at a graveyard someplace came up with what they think is his 5th, and so he is now officially an ace. And on the agenda, it said Captain Royce Williams, Navy, is on here, 4 MiGs. And he came and he says, "You know, what's that about?" Yeah, I got to hear this, he said. And finally, he heard it, and he said, "My gosh, probably ought to get the word out." Well, he said, the Air Force was sent there with guys trained and knew what they were pointing at, and they had at least an equal good airplane. And they didn't get to shoot. They were as a wingman for probably 3-4 months, and then they fleeted on up to flight commander and could actually engage. And they were there for 100 missions or a year, and the most any of them got were 2 in one mission, and only 6 of those. And so this novice getting 4 in the first crack was sort of a surprise.
Did your gun camera film catch all this?
Another farce. We had a talented airman, I think. I don't think he was even third-class petty officer, but he was sort of our graphics guy and worked with the gun camera film. And I think he thought he was DeMille or somebody when he got in it, but he didn't like the fuzziness stuff, so he cut and cut and cut and cut down. It had practically nothing left of the gun camera film when he edited it and turned it loose. So yeah, it had some stuff on it, but it wasn't the whole story.
Can you explain it sounds like there's some kind of hierarchy in a group when who gets to shoot. The wingman doesn't get to shoot?
This is Air Force doctrine. He is trained to be at a position to where he's the lookout. And so the lead of the element, as they call it, is the shooter, unless he loses sight or something like that, and the guy's still a threat, in which if the wingman still has him in sight, he will probably pass the lead to him and let him shoot. Other than that, he's there to call clear, 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 or break and get out of here. He's not the shooter under the typical tactic.
So you've got a lead and a single wingman, or can you have 2? And then
One wingman. Then usually he had a second element. We call it section, and that's where I started out on this fight, was the section lead. And then sometimes there's, that's called a division. Sometimes they have multiple divisions as well. So after engagement, usually the craft would break up to be groups of 2, and everybody wallowing around. The difference between what I thought, when they said that's your target, was that I had been taught that we were here to defend the fleet, and there wasn't any question about it. It was up to me to do the best I could. Under the conditions a lot of them had in Korea, was they were covered by radar and other flights in the area, and if they had a choice when they first engaged or first noticed the situation, if it isn't satisfactory, they could always bug out. They didn't consider they were there defending anything, they were there trying to rack up numbers. Sir?
At the altitude, when you engage these guys, could you turn with them?
You know, I don't think so, but maybe. I was at full throttle all the time, and kicking the airplane around a lot. It didn't have a whole lot of speed, and they were overtaking me, and at my speed is slower. I could turn in while they were really hot, but darn well performing airplane, and actually their best choices were if they didn't want to slow down and just sit on my tail, making these cutting passes, they would just zoom on up, and I couldn't pull the nose up and go after them. So it was pretty much level, 26,000 feet, full power, booting the airplane around as best I could.
I was just curious, what were the other 2 carriers?
What were they?
The names of the other 2 carriers.
I think it was the Essex and the Kearsarge. I'm not sure, but I think so. Is that close enough?
Now, your fight, the narrative is pretty straightforward, but you didn't know for sure you'd gotten them all until who told you? Was it the Russians who confirmed?
Well, when I went to meet Admiral Briscoe, he told me about the source of this thing, and he said that they had these guys from takeoff till the remnant returned. And they want that young man to know that he got at least 3. And I knew that for a while, and nobody else did, except Admiral Briscoe and NSA. And when I met with the president, we didn't talk about numbers or anything like that, didn't go into the fight itself. And then the Russians came up. They're the ones that told where each guy dropped. They knew exactly, and they said 4.
Wouldn't that have been secure information from the Russian standpoint at that time?
This was
Russians are pretty forthcoming in a lot of these things. They assume they know and probably everybody else knows, so it ain't no big secret.
You keep mentioning the NSA. How was the NSA involved?
How did what?
NSA. How was the NSA involved?
How did they get the ears on all the chatter? How was the NSA able to eavesdrop?
NSA had a detachment on the Helena, which was right off the coast of Vladivostok, and they were painting them radar-wise and so forth from takeoff and engagement and back, and they had Russian speakers there, and they were on their frequencies, so they knew what happened.
So the NSA told your ship, or did the ship pick up the incoming airplanes by themselves?
No, the aircraft came right over the task force, and that's about where they were when I popped through 12,000 feet and spotted them.
Were you sitting alert for that purpose anyway?
No, we would have launched in any case. We maintained a cap, so we were relieving another cap.
You didn't have bombs, did you have wing tanks?
Well, the Panther has them built in at the tips.
Did you punch them off for the combat?
No, never did. I don't know if I even had that capability. I think it was hardwired down there, but I'm not sure.
Just quickly, on behalf of the Navy guys in the room, I just want to say bravo Zulu. That was a hell of a good job.
I'll give you the quickie fun of this thing. I guess the Navy was proud of it, although they didn't know what happened. And so the President-elect Eisenhower was making a tour, and according to his promise, if elected, he would go to Korea and lay his hand on it. So the Navy thought, wouldn't it be fun to get me to go over and talk to him? So I had orders to go to Pohang, which was K6, I think, where the Marines held forth. So I flown over there and met with General Jerome, and he said, well, I'm really waiting for Admiral Jocko Clark, and I would go with him to Seoul. In the meantime, what can we do for you? I said, gee, just put me in touch with your operations guys, and they'll take care of me. And they did. So when Jocko arrived, it was about Christmas time, and we met for a toddy in the general's house. We had a nice glowing fireplace. Next day we went on to Seoul and got dropped off at a hotel, and he said, now this isn't for sure, but if you're on the docket, I'll give you a call and send a car. Well, I got the call, went on, came to University of Seoul, where the headquarters, 8th Army, and there was a man with a rifle about every 16 feet all the way around. And we came to the entrance, and there was a squad with a captain, corporal of the guard, and they almost jerked me out of the car. They were ready for trouble, and they weren't alerted that I was coming, and I didn't look like I was the kind of guy they were looking for. So while I'm starting to be quizzed, the phone rings, and it's Admiral Clark, and he says, have you got a Navy lieutenant down there? named Williams. He says, "Your name Williams?" I said, "Yes, sir." And then he put the phone on, looked at in motion, get him up there. I arrived and it was snowing, and Emma Clark came out and dusted the snow off, combed my hair, and led me in. And here's General Bradley and Mark Clark and all these guys from World War II. We were 16 in the room, 15 at this time because Eisenhower wasn't in yet. So I met these guys and we're just chatting. And somebody says, "Gentlemen, the President." So we all snap to, and he comes in, "At ease, boys, at ease." So they lead him over. I'm the only guy he doesn't know. So we meet, and he took me by the arm and came over, and there were just a few chairs, maybe seating for 6. And I was the least. And he sat me down in this overstuffed chair, and it had an arm on it. He sat on the arm, put his arm around me, and he said, "Lieutenant, before we get down to business, we ought to have a drink, don't you think?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "We have bourbon, scotch, water, and soda. What do you have?" "John, my son's the bartender." I said, "A bourbon and water, please." He says, "We have awfully good scotch." I said, "Well, no, I prefer bourbon and water." He says, "Young man, this is really good scotch." I said, "But sir, I drink bourbon." He said, "Lieutenant, this is the world's greatest scotch." I said, "Mr. President, I drink bourbon." "Oh, John, give him a bourbon and water." That's it.
So what uniform were you in? Were you in?
I was in greens, the kind that you can stuff in the bag and always look good. Yes, sir.
Could you tell us a little bit about your career after this event? I mean, you were a famous guy, right? So what happened then?
No, I wasn't. Because nobody. I'm becoming because somebody wrote an article in a magazine. So I wouldn't have been here otherwise. I haven't had speaking tours. I just don't talk about it. It's kind of strange to me to be invited to anything. Yeah, I had a good career. I had another deployment right after that in Cougars, the swept wing F9, F6 on Boxer. Then I went from there. Orders to NAVCAD, procurement officer, Miami, Florida. And before I could execute that, we got an immediate message changing my orders to NAVCAD, procurement officer, Akron, Ohio. So I came back hitchhiking on a DC-3 from the Philippines to Hawaii. No food, cold, sitting on it. We stopped at Eniwetok, and I had some quarters. I got some candy bars, and that's what got me across the Pacific. I came back and had a farewell party at Claremont Lutheran Church, and the movers at the house, and they were packing things, but nothing had gone into the vans. I got a call from Washington, report tomorrow morning, out nav in accordance with orders at exchange duty with Nellis Air Force Base. So I told my wife I'm going to grab a bag and this and that and take me down to the airport. I caught the first flight out, got back here and met with Butch. No. The first leader of the Blues.
Boris.
Yeah, Butch Boris. He was my Washington D.C. contact. So I came back and, well, I had a great tour. My first command really was Air Force F-86H squadron. They were brand new H's, and I had a lot of things there. I was with the fighter weapons school instructing and so forth, but this was really a crown because I was a lieutenant and the other commanding officers were majors and lieutenant colonels. But that was very brief, and I went to Fleet Air Gunnery Unit. I had a crash in a Panther over there, which was a tow plane. I was instructing in FJs. And my back is mostly artificial. I have 9 vertebrae that are out of whack. And I went from there to the youngest attendee at Armed Forces Staff College. And I went to Intrepid, and from there to plank owner on the Independence. From there, the instructor, chief flight instructor at 124, and I was just barely there when I got bossed out with orders to be the head of promotion plans at Bupers. I went from there as XO and CEO of VF-33 and had a squadron of F-8 Echoes, and then I had a squadron of F-4s and on the America. The other was on the Round the World cruise on the Enterprise, which was kind of fun. Then I was the wing commander in the Kitty Hawk, and second tour was CAG out there. They had looked me over because they were giving me things like Valium and whatnot to take care of some of my problems, and somebody thought better of this, that I shouldn't be doing this. So I went back, and one thing they had me on was 5.5 grains of thyroid a day, and I'm told the body produces about 2. So they had me all pumped up, and every time I looked like I couldn't handle a 20-hour day, they would give me some more. Well, when they got through with me, they said, "Gee, your thyroid's okay, just stop it." Well, my hair started falling out, and I was flying off the carrier day and night and pooped. And this got reviewed at BUMED, and they got in touch with BUPERS, and they sent me a set of orders that you were cleared for flight and naval aircraft in combat, in command, not at the actual controls. So I got myself a set of orders who went through the NFO reg. So the second tour out, I was the backseater in the F4. I went from there as executive assistant to DCNO for Air, and while there, Sybil Stockdale came to town and had lunch with the Secretary of the Navy, CNO, Chief of Naval Personnel, and my boss, Admiral Connolly. And during the discussions, she said, "If you don't take some Navy captain who's been out there, a pilot, and put his career in the line for these guys, you're not trying hard enough." So when Admiral Connolly came back from the lunch, he patted me on the back, "Going to miss you, Royce." He said, so the next day I was the Navy Director of Prisoner War Matters. So I did that until I got command of the amphibious flagship for Pacific Fleet. I went from there. I was supposed to be J3C, and they had never had anyone who hadn't had command of a carrier, but I was going to be it. But a friend of mine, Dutch Neerman, came through and he had one, so they gave him that job and made me deputy to J3C, which is command centers in the Pacific, until they, Secretary of Defense Laird said what we're going to do about people like General Laval, who used his authority as Thomas McVie deputy when he was back making policy with the president in the Oval Room. So he knew we were during a stand-down, so we were authorized to take pictures and escort and fire if fired upon. So he'd select targets, and he'd escort the photo plane with 16 loaded for Bear airplanes. He knew they were going to get shot at, so he was playing his own war and bombing what he wanted to, and I didn't go over in Washington at all, so Secretary Laird was asked, "What are you going to do about it?" He said, "We're going to establish the Office of Inspector General at every sink." Well, the Joint Chiefs of Staff didn't know about this. This was just him and Congress, and he stepped out and he was overcome by the press, and he told them what he said. So we maybe read it in the press before we got the official information, but now Admiral McCain had to have an Inspector General. So Admiral Lord Hayworth, who was J1, figured I was readily available. He called me up and said, "Hey, you are the Inspector General SINCPAC." You gotta be kidding. I mean, the Navy doesn't have Inspector General. At that time, we didn't. He says, "We're giving you a wing down there, giving you Lieutenant Commander, admin guy, and some enlisted personnel, and hop to it." That was about my instructions. So I said, "Gee whiz, RPAC, PACAF, I bet they had Inspector General." So I went down there. I said, "Give me anything that's important to this job. I'm going to plagiarize." And I started lifting whatnot, and wrote the instructions for Inspector General. Then I wrote myself a set of orders to go out and inspect that 4-star by myself. So there I did. I landed in Bangkok, and the General thought enough of this thing that at least that one of his 2-star deputy in his private jet picked me up. And he said, the General want to see you on arrival. I said, I sort of surmised that he would. So when it came in, I almost coming in with my hands up, don't shoot. And I said, I tell you what, if you put me in touch with your operators here, I want to find out what you generate and what you get from other people, and how you use this to pick targets, and I'll run the operation here. And here's what I'll do. I'll write my report before I leave, and I'll let you look at it. And he was pleased, just pink. And so I went on, and then I went to Comfair Westpac as the chief of staff. And I still got to do some things because my boss didn't like Japanese or customs or the food or anything, and my wife and I enjoyed the whole thing. And she got to get around, but I was pretty much glued to a desk because my boss was back in Washington most of the time or someplace. And along came Garcia, Diego Garcia. So they needed to have an American look at it. So I was sent down there, and I said, Quebec, it looks okay to me, let's use it. So the decision was made, and now we've got a base down there, shared with the Brits. I came back, I went to assistant chief of staff, CAPT, and during that time I was back in the, I've had 30-some operations. I'm back in the hospital again, and I come on out kind of limping, dragging like so. So they surveyed me for temporary disability retirement, and I got recalled from there for convoy commodore duty, and then I got retired in 1980. So I'm in from 1942 to 1980, and in 1981 I got recalled for tour of convoy commodore, taking a group of about 20 ships on a macular and training mission out to Hawaii. Hung it up. Don't play aviator no more. Thank you.
Very